The rain just came down hard, the way trouble always does, without warning, without mercy, without a single care for the woman standing at the diner window with crumpled bills spread across her palm like a losing hand. Michelle Anderson counted them again. $19.43. She already knew the total. She'd counted 3 times on the walkover. But there was something about doing it again, laying each bill flat, pressing out the creases with her thumb, that made her feel like maybe she'd missed something. Like maybe reality had made an error and she was about to catch it. She hadn't missed anything. $19.43. That was all that stood between her and an empty stomach before a 12-hour shift. She ordered the soup. Not the one she wanted, the chicken and rice that smelled like someone's grandmother had been standing over it since morning, but the tomato. Cheaper by $2. She stirred it slowly, watching the steam curl up and disappear, and tried to remember what it felt like not to count everything. She couldn't. Outside, the rain slammed against the diner windows in thick sheets. The street was nearly empty. One streetlight flickered at the corner like it was trying to give up. A couple ran past under a shared umbrella, laughing about something Michelle couldn't hear. She watched them until they turned the corner and vanished, and then she looked back down at her soup. That was when the black car pulled up. It was the kind of car that didn't belong on a street like this one. Long, sleek. The kind of dark that absorbed light rather than reflected it. It stopped in front of the diner with the quiet authority of something that had never once been told no. Michelle watched without meaning to. The back door opened. 2 men climbed out, not in a hurry, not slow either, just deliberate in the way people move when they've never had a reason to rush, because everything always waits for them. They reached back inside, and then they were dragging someone out. Not escorting. Not helping. Dragging. The third man's feet barely caught the ground before they let go, and he stumbled, one hand landing on the wet hood of the car, the other pressed hard against his ribs. His suit was expensive. Even from inside the diner, even through the rain-blurred glass, Michelle could see that. Dark fabric, perfectly cut, the kind of thing that cost more than 3 months of her rent. It was ruined now. His shirt was torn at the collar, and something dark, she didn't let herself name it immediately, was spreading from his side. The 2 men got back in the car without a word. The car left. He just stood there in the rain. Alone. Bleeding. Too proud or too stubborn to fall. People on the street glanced over. One man slowed his walk, looked, then kept moving. A woman on the other side pulled her coat tighter and crossed the street entirely. The diner owner, an older man named Gerald who never missed anything, appeared at Michelle's shoulder, looked out the window for 2 seconds, then shuffled back toward the kitchen muttering something about it not being his business. Michelle watched the man outside press himself against a lamppost. His head dropped slightly. His knees buckled once, caught, held. She looked back at her soup. She picked up her spoon. She set it down. Damn it, she said to no one. She was outside before she finished the thought, her jacket already soaked through by the time she reached him. Up close, he was tall, taller than he looked from the window, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a jaw set so hard it could have been carved from something expensive. His eyes, when they opened and found her face, were dark and sharp and not remotely grateful. I don't need. You're bleeding, Michelle said flatly. And you're about 30 seconds from hitting the pavement. So either let me help you, or lie down in the puddle now and save us both some time. He stared at her. She stared back. He didn't move toward her, but he didn't move away either. She took that as consent and slipped her arm under his, taking more of his weight than she expected. He was heavy, dense in the way men are when there's real strength underneath all that tailoring. But he was also undeniably losing blood. She got him through the diner door. Gerald reappeared, arms crossed, already shaking his head. Michelle gave him a look that silenced whatever he was about to say, and she half-walked, half-dragged the stranger to the booth in the back corner, farthest from the windows. She grabbed napkins from every dispenser she passed. She pressed them to his side without asking, and his hand came up fast, a reflex, something trained, and locked around her wrist. Not violent, but not gentle either. His grip was like a decision that had already been made. You should leave. His voice was low. quiet in a way that somehow carried over the rain. Accented slightly, something smooth and Southern European that didn't quite fit the bleeding and the ruined suit. Then bleed somewhere else, Michelle said. She didn't pull her wrist back. She just held his gaze. I've already used my last decent napkins on you. Least you can do is not die in Gerald's booth. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated than that. You have no idea who I am. And you have no idea how little that matters to me right now. She pressed the napkins harder. He hissed through his teeth. Hold those. I'm going to call someone. She used the last $19.43 to make 2 calls, one to a clinic 2 blocks over whose doctor owed Gerald a favor, and one to a cab that would get this stranger off the street before whoever threw him out of that car decided to come back and check their work. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have walked back? Or would you have kept going? Because we're just getting started. The clinic was small and smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. The doctor, a tired, practical woman named Dr. Reyes who asked exactly 0 questions about how the injury happened, stitched him up in 40 minutes and sent them both back into the rain with a look that said she'd already forgotten they were there. Michelle's apartment was 3 blocks from the clinic. She couldn't explain, even later, why she turned left instead of right at the corner. Why she said, "You can sleep on the couch," instead of flagging him a car and calling it even. Maybe it was the way he moved, carefully, like someone cataloging how much pain he could carry without showing it. Maybe it was the way he hadn't thanked her and hadn't pretended to. Maybe she was just tired of walking away from things. Her apartment was small enough that the whole living room could be seen from the front door in one glance. One window. One couch. A bookshelf that leaned slightly to the left because she'd never gotten around to fixing it. She gave him a clean shirt that had belonged to a man she'd rather not think about, a glass of water, and instructions to stay horizontal. He looked at the couch the way someone might look at an unexpected puzzle. "You live here alone?" "Good night," Michelle said, and went to bed. She didn't sleep much. She lay in the dark and listened to the rain slow and eventually stop, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, she admitted to herself that she had absolutely no idea what she'd brought into her apartment. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about the way his hand had caught her wrist. The way his voice had dropped into something that felt less like a warning and more like a fact. By morning, she had convinced herself it didn't matter. He'd be gone, and she'd never see him again, and this would become the kind of story she told herself on hard days. The time she helped a stranger. The one moment of pure recklessness that cost her exactly $19.43 and nothing more. She walked into the living room. He was gone. The couch was neater than she'd left it, the blanket folded with a precision that felt pointed. The glass of water was empty, rinsed, and placed upside down beside the sink. The shirt she'd lent him was folded on the armrest. No note. No goodbye. Not even the courtesy of a text from a number she didn't have. Michelle stood in the middle of her own apartment and let out a short, dry laugh. Of course. She went to the fridge. Empty as expected. She went to her purse. Empty as expected. She had 4 hours before her next shift, $0, and the very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from choosing to be decent when decent costs you everything you had. She made black coffee and stood at the window and watched the street below come awake. A man walking his dog. A woman with a stroller. 2 kids on bikes cutting across the sidewalk and vanishing down an alley. Normal things. Safe things. She drank her coffee. She was going to be fine. She was always fine. That was the thing about being the person who helped. Nobody ever worried about whether you were okay, because you always seemed like you were managing, and so they let you keep managing until managing became the only thing you knew how to do. The knock came at 11:30. Not on her door. On the building's front entrance, which meant someone had buzzed in, which meant someone had been let in, which meant whoever it was had either picked the lock or used the kind of authority that makes people open doors without thinking. She was still in her work uniform, halfway through lacing her shoes, when the sound of footsteps on the stairs told her it wasn't the male. She opened the door before they could knock. 3 men. Suits. The kind of expressionless that takes years to learn. The one in front, older, built like a wall that had learned patience, stepped forward a half-inch and said, very calmly, "Miss Michelle Anderson, Mr. Padro Lorenzo would like to see you." Her stomach did something she refused to call fear. "He has a last name," she said. "He has many things," the man said, "including the knowledge of where you live, where you work, and the name of the clinic where his wound was treated last night." A pause. Not threatening, just informative. "He'd very much prefer to thank you in person." Michelle looked at the three of them for a long moment. Then she looked down at her half-laced shoe. She finished lacing it. She picked up her jacket. "Fine," she said, "but I have a shift at 3. The car was immaculate inside. Michelle sat in the back between two windows and watched the city change as they drove from her neighborhood, where the storefronts were small and the sidewalks were cracked and everything felt like it was holding on by sheer stubbornness, to a part of the city that felt like a different country entirely. Taller buildings, quieter streets, the kind of clean that gets maintained rather than achieved. The building they stopped in front of had no visible number. Just glass and steel and a doorman who opened the car door before it had fully stopped moving. Michelle stepped out. She looked up. She looked back at the man who'd come to her door. "This is a thank you," she said. "Mr. Lorenzo's version," he said. The elevator was fast and silent and opened directly into a penthouse that made Michelle stop walking for exactly 1 second before she made herself keep moving. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A city skyline laid out like something that had been put there for him specifically. Furniture that was expensive without announcing it. No clutter. No photographs. Nothing personal except, somehow, the feeling that every inch of this space had been deliberately chosen. And there he was, standing at the window with his back to her, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a phone he was clearly done with because he set it face down on a side table as she walked in. He turned. Clean now. Rested. The suit was different, similar cut, darker color, no blood. The stitches were hidden beneath his shirt. Only the slight stiffness in how he held his left side gave any sign that last night had happened at all. He looked at her with that same dark, unhurried attention she'd felt in the diner booth. Like he was reading something written in a language only he spoke. "You look disappointed," he said. "Were you expecting flowers?" "I was expecting manners," Michelle said. "A note, maybe. A text. Something in the category of basic human acknowledgement. I left the glass clean. You left without a word after I spent my last dollar getting you off the street." She kept her voice even. "But sure." The glass. Very classy. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. That same complicated expression from the night before. The man from her doorstep, she knew his name now, Franco, because she'd heard one of the others use it in the elevator, appeared beside Padro's shoulder and said something low in Italian. Padro answered without looking at him. Franco pressed his lips together, clearly suppressing something, and stepped back. "Sit down," Padro said. "I'm fine standing. I'm not asking because you look tired. I'm asking because I'd like to have a conversation without my neck aching." She looked at him. He was at least 4 inches taller than her. He had absolutely no reason to be uncomfortable looking down. She sat. Not because he'd asked. Because the chair was behind her and her legs were tired, and she was not going to give him the satisfaction of knowing it was his request that did it. He sat across from her. He studied her for a moment the way people study things they can't quite classify. "You didn't run," he said. "From what?" "Last night. When you saw the car leave. When you saw the blood. Most people calculate the risk in that situation and decide it's not worth it." "I calculated the risk," Michelle said. "I just came up with a different answer." "What was your answer?" She shrugged. "That he was a person bleeding in the rain. Didn't need to be more complicated than that." Padro was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved in miniature behind him, cars and pedestrians and a whole world going about its business, none of it touching this room. "I'm going to repay what you spent," he said. "And more. The amount I spent is $19.43. You don't need to make it more. Consider it interest." "I wasn't charging interest." "No," he said. "That's what makes it interesting." Over the next week, Michelle learned that Padro Lorenzo didn't do things halfway. He didn't send a check for $19. He arranged for her building's long-ignored heating system to be repaired, anonymously. She discovered only when the super mentioned it to everyone. He sent food to her diner with a note that said simply, "Compliments of a satisfied customer," which was absurd because he'd never eaten there. He sent Franco to her building one morning with an envelope that contained, when she opened it in the elevator, enough cash to cover 2 months' rent. She sent it back. Franco appeared again the next morning with the same envelope and a look on his face that suggested he would keep appearing indefinitely. She kept it. But she was furious about it in a very specific way that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the fact that he'd made her feel things she hadn't expected to feel. He kept calling her back, always with an excuse that was paper-thin and delivered with complete sincerity, which was somehow more irritating than if he'd been obvious about it. "I'd like to discuss what I owe you." "We already discussed it." "I'd like to discuss it again." "That's not how discussing works." "Come to dinner." "I'm working." "Then lunch." "I'm sleeping." "Then coffee." 20 minutes. "You can hate me for the full duration." She went. She told herself it was because she was curious, which was true. She did not tell herself the other thing, which was also true. The coffee became lunch. Lunch became a walk through a part of the city she'd never been to, because Padro walked like he knew every street personally and somehow made that feel like a gift he was handing her rather than a fact about himself. She didn't tell him how long it had been since she'd walked anywhere without a destination and a time she had to be somewhere. He talked, when she asked him questions, with the careful precision of someone who had decided exactly how much of a thing to say. He didn't perform his life the way people do when they want to impress. He just told her things. Small things. That he couldn't eat tomatoes. That he learned 3 languages before he was 16 and couldn't tell you which one he dreamed in. That he had a younger sister in another country whose name he said once and then didn't offer again, and Michelle understood without being told that this was something precious that he'd handed her and expected her to hold carefully. She held it carefully. He noticed everything. That was the part that unsettled her in ways she hadn't predicted. He noticed when she reached for her coffee cup and then didn't drink from it because she'd gotten distracted by something outside the window. He noticed the specific rhythm of her silence, how it was different when she was thinking from when she was deciding not to say something. He noticed, once, when she laughed at something and then caught herself laughing, and he said nothing about it, but something in his expression filed it away. He got jealous. She saw it happen in real time and had to press her lips together to keep from smiling about it. A man at a restaurant, polite, harmless, clearly just someone who found her attractive, stopped by their table to ask if she was who he thought she was, some mix-up with a name. Michelle talked to him for 2 minutes, easy and friendly, the way she talked to everyone. When the man left, she looked back at Padro. He was cutting his food into pieces that were too small for someone who wasn't paying very close attention to his plate. "You're welcome to say something," Michelle said. "I have nothing to say. You've cut that piece of chicken 4 times. I like it small." "Padro." He set down his knife. "He was looking at you. People look at people. It's a natural human thing. Not like that." He was perfectly polite. "Perfectly polite is its own kind of thing," Padro said, with a certainty that clearly came from somewhere personal. "I know exactly what perfectly polite looks like when it's a strategy." Michelle picked up her wine glass. "This is fascinating. Are you going to be like this every time we're in public?" "Probably." "And you're just going to say it directly? Not even pretend you're not jealous?" "I'm not jealous," he said. "I'm observant." "Right." She took a sip. "Very healthy. Very stable behavior." He almost smiled. He turned it into a very serious look at the menu for a dessert he wasn't going to order. Michelle watched him do it and felt something warm move through her that she immediately decided not to examine. He showed up at her diner one Tuesday afternoon without announcement, took the corner booth like he'd reserved it, and ordered black coffee and a sandwich he clearly did not intend to eat. He sat there for an hour while she worked, not watching her in any obvious way, just present. When she finally came over on her break and sat across from him and said, "Why are you here?" he looked at her with complete composure and said, "The coffee is good." "It is absolutely not," she said. "It grows on you." "Padro." I was passing by. You live 40 minutes from here. I was passing by on a longer route. She looked at him. He looked back. Outside, the street went about its business. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and fried things and something familiar she couldn't name. You could just say you wanted to see me, she said. A pause. Very brief. He picked up his coffee. I wanted to see you, he said, like it was simple. Like it wasn't a crack in something she'd thought was solid. She went home that night and lay in the dark and thought about the way he'd said it. I wanted to see you. Not dressed up in anything. Not surrounded by excuses or wrapped in that careful precision he usually deployed. Just the plain fact of the thing, handed to her like the thing about his sister. Like something he expected her to hold carefully. She held it carefully. And then, 3 weeks in, she stopped being careful. It was a Tuesday. She was late leaving work, and she took a different route home longer, but lit better, because the alley shortcut had been making her nervous since the neighborhood changed its feeling a few weeks back. She turned the corner onto a side street and nearly walked into 2 men in conversation outside a building she'd passed 100 times without looking at twice. She wouldn't have thought anything of it. Except she recognized one of the voices. And she recognized one of the phrases not because she knew the language, but because Padro had said it once in passing, and she'd asked what it meant, and he'd given her a small, careful half-answer that she'd accepted at the time. She walked faster. She went home. She sat at her kitchen table with her coat still on. She pulled up her phone and did something she'd told herself not to do 3 weeks ago and had mended at the time. She searched his name. Padro Lorenzo. The first result wasn't a business profile. The second wasn't either. The third one was a news article from 4 years ago with a headline that she read twice, then a third time, then set her phone face down on the table and stared at the wall for a long time. She went to him. She didn't call first. She told the doorman her name, and he called up and she was in the elevator before she'd thought through what she was going to say. The elevator opened into the penthouse and Padro was already standing. He'd been standing before she arrived. She could tell, the way you can tell when someone has been in motion and stopped, and he looked at her face and whatever he'd been about to say changed. You know, he said. I know. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Tell me the rest. He told her. Not all of it, she understood, even in the moment, that not all of it could be told at once. That some things existed in layers she'd have to arrive at gradually, but enough. The Lorenzo family. The operations. The network that ran underneath parts of the city she'd driven through without knowing. The power structures. The money. The way it worked and had worked for 30 years and would continue working regardless of what either of them decided in the next 5 minutes. He didn't perform remorse. He didn't reach for her sympathy. He sat across from her in that expensive, impersonal penthouse and told her the truth in the same careful, precise voice he used for everything, and he watched her face while he did it. You never lied to me, she said, when he stopped. No, you just didn't say enough. No, he agreed. She was quiet. Outside, the city was doing its nighttime thing, lights coming on in the tall buildings, traffic thinning, the particular hush that settles over a city when the day shift of living is done and the night shift begins. She looked at it for a moment. If I stay, she said. This doesn't change, he said immediately. Not defensive. Just honest. I won't promise you things that aren't true. I won't tell you that I'm going to walk away from this, or that you can change it. That's not what this is. What is this then? He looked at her. Something moved through his expression, something she'd seen traces of before, but always at a careful distance, like he'd been keeping it at the edges. This time it was right in the center. Something I wasn't planning on, he said. She stood up. She picked up her jacket. He didn't move. He watched her with that dark, steady attention, and he let her go. She could feel it, the letting go, in the way the room felt when she crossed it toward the elevator. He could have said something. He had the words. She'd heard him use language like a precision instrument when he wanted to. He didn't use any of it. She pressed the elevator button. She stood there. The doors opened. She didn't get in. She turned around. He was exactly where she'd left him, still watching, still waiting, and when she came back across the room, she didn't look away from his face, and he didn't look away from hers. I need you to understand something, she said. Tell me. I'm not naive. I know what you are. I know what this world is. And I'm not here because I think loving someone means you fix them or follow them into something you can't survive. She stopped a foot away from him. I'm here because when I walked away just now, it was the first time in 3 weeks that walking somewhere felt wrong. He was very still. I'm not asking you to be something different, she continued. I'm not going to sit in this penthouse waiting to be scared. I have my own life, my own work, my own everything. But I'm also not going to walk away from something real because it's complicated. She looked at him. So, that's what this is from my side. What is it from yours? Padro took one step, then another. He stopped close enough that she could see the detail of the stitches at his side where the shirt pulled slightly. Close enough that when he spoke, she felt it as much as heard it. You're the most dangerous thing that's happened to me in 15 years, he said. And I've had people try to kill me 4 times. That's concerning. Yes. Is that a yes to what I asked? It's a yes, he said. Michelle. He said her name the way he said things that mattered, once, clearly, without decoration. She let out a slow breath. He reached up and tucked a piece of her hair back with one careful hand, like he'd been thinking about doing it for weeks and was only just allowing himself. She held still. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone and stopped. Careful, he said quietly. I might get used to this. You're already used to it, she said. You've been used to it since the diner. Earlier than that. The rain. The moment you told me I looked like I couldn't afford you. The corner of his mouth lifted. No one has spoken to me like that in a very long time. Did you like it? I thought about it for 14 hours. She laughed. Really laughed, the kind that comes up before you can think about it, and he watched it happen with an expression she'd never quite seen on him before, something open and unguarded and slightly undone. She thought, there it is. The thing underneath all the precision. She liked it. She liked him. Terribly and specifically and without any reasonable justification, which had always been, in her experience, how the real things worked. Things changed after that night. Not in a dramatic way, not in the way of dramatic declarations or visible shifts in the city's power structure. In a quieter way. In the way of Tuesday afternoons and phone calls that started with something practical and ended an hour later with neither of them quite sure when the conversation had turned personal. In the way of Franco developing the very particular expression of a man who has been waiting for something to resolve and is relieved that it finally has. Padro came to her diner. He ate the soup, not just the coffee, and when she asked him what he thought, he said, "The tomato is better than I expected," which from him was the equivalent of a standing ovation. She came to the penthouse and ate takeout in the living room because she refused to sit in the dining room, which felt like a stage set. She brought containers from a Thai place 3 blocks from her apartment, and she set them out on the coffee table in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows with the city laid out behind her like it was a backdrop someone had arranged. And she ate like she'd been eating there for years. Padro sat in the chair across the room and watched her with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and failing. "What?" she said, without looking up. "Nothing. You're looking at me. I look at many things. You're looking at me like I'm doing something remarkable. You eat like you own the place," he said. "No one eats like that in here. Maybe that's the problem." She held out a container. "Do you want the Patsy EW? It's better than it should be." He crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch, not in the chair, not at the studied distance he usually kept, and took the container. He ate without comment. Outside, the city went on being the city. The lights on the tall buildings came on one by one like something waking up. "Can I ask you something?" Michelle said. "Yes." If I hadn't turned around. If I'd kept walking that night. He considered this. He took it seriously, the way he took everything. "I would have found a way to find you. To pay me back?" Initially. A pause. And then something else. "What would you have said?" "I don't know. I've never had to work backward from a loss like that." He looked at her. "I'm better at things I can plan." "You couldn't have planned me." "No," he said, with something in his voice that sounded like gratitude. "I couldn't have planned you." She smiled at the window. He watched her do it. They didn't have perfect. Perfect was never on the table, and they both knew it, and neither of them had ever been particularly interested in things that were on the table anyway. What they had was real. That specific, inconvenient, surprisingly solid thing that shows up when two people decide to be honest about what they are and what they want and what they're willing to build out of the gap in between. She kept her apartment. Her shifts. The way her bookshelf leaned slightly to the left. He kept his world, the operations, the power structures, the careful language, and the controlled rooms, and the city laid out below him like a map of his own authority. When those worlds touched, they touched carefully, and when they didn't touch, that was fine too. It was not simple. It was not soft. It was something harder and more durable than either of those things. It was the kind of thing you tell the truth about. One evening, 3 months in, the kind of ordinary evening that you only recognize as important later. Michelle was sitting cross-legged on Padro's couch with a book she wasn't reading because she'd been listening to the sounds of the penthouse settle around her the way a place settles when you've started to become familiar to it. Padro came in from a phone call he'd taken in the other room, and he stood in the doorway for a moment just looking at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything. Then she said, "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Looking at me like I'm something you didn't see coming." He crossed the room. He sat beside her. He took the book out of her hands, not abruptly, just gently, the way you take something from someone when you want their attention, and set it on the table. "That's because you are," he said. "Padro Lorenzo," she said. "Are you being sentimental?" "Don't tell anyone." "I'll tell everyone." "You know no one who would believe you." She laughed. He let himself smile, really smile, the one that changed his whole face. She'd made a study of it without meaning to. The way it arrived slowly and stayed longer than people expected. The way it was the most unguarded version of him. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he said back, like it was something they'd been doing forever. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He stayed very still for a moment, cataloging it. She knew, the way he cataloged everything, and then he put his arm around her in that careful way of his, like precision applied to something precious. Outside, the city kept going. Inside, this. If this story got you, if you felt every single moment of it, then subscribe right now so you never miss one. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which scene hit hardest, and share this with someone who needs a good story today. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.